Hey everyone, welcome to today's webinars by Network to Code. We will be starting here in 1 or 2 minutes. Let everyone funnel in to the webinar. So if you guys could just hold tight for a few minutes, we will start here shortly. Good to see everyone funneling in right now. We are probably going to start this here in a few seconds. Welcome to today's webinar by Network to Code. Just going to give a few seconds for everyone to funnel in. All right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar by Network to Code. Today, we are going to be talking about the Nautobot Floor application that has just recently released. So we'll go over some of that. Today's agenda will be pretty standard. We'll go through some introductions of who you'll be hearing from today, as well as a brief overview of Nautobot, and then dive into the application specifically regarding the floor plan. Talk about its overview, some of its features, and then we will be fortunate enough to see a nice demo today and round off today's webinar with a nice Q&A session. For introductions, pleasure to meet everybody here. My name is Taylor Dawson. I am a sales engineer here at Network to Code. And with me, who will be performing the presentation and the webinar, is Tim Shryak, who is the Director of Sales Engineering at Network to Code. And without further ado, I will let Tim take this away. As one note, if you guys have any questions throughout the webinar, please leverage the Q&A section to ask any questions, and myself and my colleagues will help answer, as well as at the end, if you want to ask any questions, we will answer that live. Tim, let's give it to you.
Thanks, Taylor. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Nice to see you all here. We have a nice, healthy group, so good to see everyone joining in to see our newest, most exciting app coming into the Nautobot ecosystem. First, just a little review for maybe those that aren't familiar with Nautobot. It is an open source project created and founded by Network to Code. It is our purpose-built driven network automation platform. Serves as a source of truth and gives you that place to drive automation into your environment from. Some of the use cases, right, as a source of truth, right, at its core, that is Nautobot's core purpose in life, is to give us that place to express our intended state for the network and therefore then drive change into the network from that. What differentiates Nautobot, though, is that addition of the automation platform on top of that data. And that's where you see this app ecosystem of things like our golden config app, the capabilities for things like circuit maintenance, chat ops, and our newest one here that we're going to be talking about today, the floor plan app. Of course, powered by all of the APIs, those concepts as far as like how do I interact with that data that's in the database, and that app ecosystem that's built there allows us to build these applications, whether they're provided by Network to Code as part of the project or something you need to custom build within your environment. All there available for you. Some of those key features, right? The ability to have that robust core data model at its core that comes for you out of the box. Then being able to do things like ensure data integrity and good data hygiene. Having that data available to you across your platforms, whether it's from external CMDB or IPAM, being able to aggregate that data into Nautobot. really extensible. And this is a key thing. We have tools often that are available off the shelf where they're very have a lot of opinions about the world, and quite often those opinions don't align with your reality. And so what we have in Nautobot is that capability to extend by adding things like custom fields or custom relationships. Making sure that data is highly available, right? Whether it's from the web UI, from the APIs, the GraphQL endpoints, all built on top of a robust enterprise grade and scale platform. And then the automation side, being able to reduce development time because you have things already available to you as part of the project. Things like being able to integrate with your LDAP or your SSO, or making sure you're logging everything. Basically, all of those requirements that you might have when you build an application and you want it to be enterprise grade. You want it to be able to meet your security requirements, your scalability requirements, and your uptime requirements. All of that there available as part of the platform. Now you can just take advantage of those things when you create your own app or use apps available as part of the project. And of course, easy to integrate with other automation platforms or orchestration tools that you might be using, whether they're open source or otherwise. So let's dive into the floor plan app. I think that's really the exciting part we're here to talk about today. Then we'll just kind of start going right into it. Here we'll just start look at the kind of the state of where we are in most tools today. Typically static, usually very difficult to maintain, or we just don't maintain them, and they tend to be quite disparate. Depending on who created the map or who was in charge of that task at that time, we often have sort of historical references where someone was doing it in Visio, someone was doing it in Excel, someone was custom creating something in code, and maybe somebody did some hand-drawn maps. And we end up with this very disparate group of tools. They're hard to maintain. They're hard to keep up to date. We always promise ourselves we're going to do it just like the data side of the world, but inevitably reality hits and we end up kind of falling behind. Our maps become outdated. We can't really trust them. The idea behind the floor plan app is that it should be dynamic. It should be driven from the data, and it should be a centralized, seamless place that gives us a standardized way in which we can maintain our floor plans. The other thing about this, right, is that we're driving it on top of the data we're using to drive everything else. So it's not like I have to go to a separate tool, as is really common in the environment today, right? Like where I might have a CMDB tool, I have my DSIM tool, and I'm trying to maintain these separate databases and duplicating efforts, which leads to being difficult. It also makes it harder to maintain. Here, because we've centralized this, it's so much easier, right? We have everything dynamically linked. I update in one place and all of my things update, whether it's my rack or my floor plan map or the data side. So here we're kind of just looking at those three different views. Here in the left-hand side of the screen, we see that overhead view of the floor plan. Here in the center, we've got views with our rack, which if you're familiar already with Nautobot, you've seen this before. And then, of course, drilling into a device, right? And being able to see those connections between the device, the rack, and the floor plan, all here in one place. So some core benefits. We can really plan and understand the floor plan space, the floor space that we have out in the data center. We can model where it is today, as well as where it's going. So we can have that speed of development from the engineering or architecture side as far as the folks that are actually laying out and planning for the future. And then for the DC ops teams, the people that are actually out there in the data center that need to move things around and install things, we have this centralized view. We're looking at the same view of the world and it's being updated as needed. So maybe the DC ops team is out there auditing and they're like, hey, this is not correct. They make that update, engineering is immediately aware of that update, right? We have that seamless communication back and forth between the teams. It also allows us to navigate really easily between that floor plan view, the rack, and the devices, right? So we can easily, in clicking and drilling down, we can move between these different views all in one place and really easily understand those relationships, making the real world visible in the model. We can look at every space we have, and we can model out really flexibly how we use this, right? So here, we have an example here in location 1, location 2, and location 3, all very different data center spaces. Maybe one is, legitimately, tier 1, tier 2 type data center space, and maybe location 3 is something maybe we just have on-prem, maybe a remote office, a branch office, something maybe not as highly monitored, but still being able to model that space and be able to understand how we're using it and have that full view across the entire environment. Being able to make these connections, again, really important between what we have in the rack and then all the information available to us. So here you can see, just by clicking on that rack in the floor plan map, we can explode out that view of the rack and really understand its use, right? Very easily visualize, oh, these are all the devices installed in that rack. This is where it's located in the world as physical location. And, oh, it happens to be assigned out to our, Nautobot airports. Yes, coming soon to you, Nautobot will be flying across the world. So we have all of this view here. Really easy, right? Simple, easy, clicking and moving and drilling down. Some of the features, right, as we drill into these features here. First of all, obviously, standardized rack tiles. We have those modeled here, making that easy to model those out. Very, very scalable, right? That grid that we're laying out in the data center that's representing the tiles in the data center, flexible, right? We can model that any which direction we want. You can think of it as an XY grid, essentially. We can create multi-tile objects. So, sometimes we have racks that span multiple tiles, or maybe we have some reason why we can't use a particular set of tiles, various number of reasons. We'll start to drill into this as we look at some examples here coming up, but we can create multi-tile objects. We can also resize the tiles in the UI if desired. So being able to just be super flexible here, the goal being, and everything we do here at Network to Code always intended to be, we want to give you the tools to model your environment as it is. You shouldn't have to adapt to the tool should adapt to you. And here's where you see that coming in as well. And then of course, custom status colors. So I can use those on my map to make my map visible and understandable so that I can look at it. I can know, oh, that's the hot dial, that's the cold dial, just by the color that I've selected for that area, for example. Let's take a look at, how I might actually create a rectile or how I start to represent rectile. And here, again, it is that XY coordinate as far as how we locate a particular representation of a rack or anything out onto that map. And as you can see here, we can also set the size. So this is where we're setting that span. If it's a multi-tile span, we can do it either horizontally or vertically, depending on the XY size. Setting status. So, we can set it to active, or we could set it to reserve for the future, or what have you, right? And then assigning out, what rack is this? And then the direction that the rack should face, allowing us to specify, here's the front of the rack. So now we can understand the directionality in the data center, and that we can lay out our floor plans such that we understand hot, cold, front and rear of the racks. As we look at viewing into those maps, here's some examples of how you might start to build out a really large, complex environment. You can see here, first, just simple, some multi-tile representations, but here then kind of going a little further, hot aisle, cold aisle represented, with then things like, hey, I've reserved this particular tile space for future use, and here's some space that's unusable, perhaps, as we look at this particular example. Other examples here, very, very complex, very large data center deployment. And, here again, representing things like, maybe it's a closet or, some air storage area, some area that's not available to us for use of laying out racks. We want to be able to map that out. So being able to really just represent and see a very large infrastructure here, all very nicely represented, we can understand how this data center is being used and what's available to us, availability within that space. As we move around the UI, just a couple of things to note. When we're particularly if we're in a large representation like this, we're going to drag to move that around the screen, and we're going to use the wheel to zoom in and out as we move through that here in the UI. So helpful, just to kind of little tips there as you're trying to work with it in the UI of your web browser. As I mentioned earlier, we can make the representation of any size rack that we wish, or device, whatever it is, and whether it's multi-tile in any direction, whether we're going vertically, horizontally, or both. Right? So we have that flexibility there to set that up. And, potentially we could use this to do things like, perhaps we have a storage closet. We could represent that as well here on the floor plan map. And again, adjusting that height and width of the tiles. As you can see here, here's an example of maybe we have something non-standard where our tiles are not fitting, the normal square standard that we see typically. Perhaps we're in a non-standard environment and we want to be able to flex that. Again, we have that capability here, whether we're adjusting the height or the width. You can see a representation here where we've stretched the tile past normal in the width direction. Those colors, right, as we alluded to earlier, being able to specify all the different components, hot aisle, cold aisle, reserved, and then perhaps unavailable. And this is all flexible, right? These particular statuses here, these are just standard status in Nautobot. So you can set these to whatever you need, whatever makes sense in your world. If maybe you don't use active, maybe you use primary, or whatever other terminology. You flex it to you, right? The tool will adapt to your standards, the way you do business. So you make the tool do the things you want it to do. You don't have to adapt to it. So let's kind of actually dive in and start taking a look at some practical real world examples here, right? So here we are in Nautobot, and if you haven't discovered it already, if this is new to you, you're going to find floor plans here under locations, under the location floor plan. If you're not familiar with locations, this is a relatively new concept we've introduced and is going to become the primary way that we talk about things like how we use the real world space. And this is going to eventually apply to things like sites as well as we transition into Nautobot 2.x. So just to be aware of that, some of the things that you may be familiar with, like say using sites, is going to transition to locations. And so that's why you see floor plans here under locations, because this is the future path that we're taking as we move into how do we model the real world into the data. So let's just drive right into a floor plan. We'll start there, and then we're kind of going to back out from that. Right? So here's an example of a floor plan that I started creating here in the demo environment just for demonstration purposes, just to give us an idea. Like, perhaps I started working on this yesterday. I started drawing it out, and then I'm like, I didn't quite finish that. So let's just kind of go through how I might finish laying out my design. So here I've got my hot aisle laid out, I've got my cold aisle laid out, and I laid in a couple of racks here into the map. But let's say, I need to complete this other side. So, pretty easy, right? Click on that little plus sign, come in here. Now that takes me right in. It populates out my XY coordinates for me. I don't need to worry about that unless I was moving it. And let's just say, hey, I'm doing a one tile device, right? So I'm going to set it to active, and I'm going to go to the next rack here, which is, say rack 105. And I'm going to set its orientation to left because we're on that other side of the hot aisle now. And we'll install that there in the map. Right? So really easy. Right? But perhaps, maybe as I'm laying this out, and I know because, I've been at the data center, there's a column right here. I can't use this tile. So I'm okay, let's go in, let's mark that. And I go in and I say, okay, I have active, I have cold, I have unusable. Now, maybe in your world, you're like, oh, you know what? I don't like that word, or maybe we want to say it's going to be reserved. I'm going to save this tile for the future. So let's just look at that real quick, because I'm like, I don't have reserved available to me here under my status. What do I do? All right, let's go dig. Let's take a look. So here under status, again, under organization, we'll find statuses. We can come in here, we can see, I've got a bunch of statuses available to me, but I'm not seeing those in the dropdown. Why is that? Because of this, content types. This is true throughout all of Nautobot. Whenever there's something that is kind of being described at a higher level, things like status or any other number of criteria within the database, when I want to use it at a lower level, I need to make sure it's been assigned to me. And that's probably what we're experiencing right here. Like you say, there is reserved, but I don't see that. So I can come in here to my reserved. I can say, take a look at why. Because floor plan hasn't been assigned. Right? So let's just edit that real quick and let's fix that. So we'll just come in here to floor plan. We'll add in the floor plan tile as a content type. And now we'll be able to go back into our location floor plan, and we'll be able to then change that status to what we're looking for, right? So we'll come back here into that tile. come down to our status, and we can say, we're going to reserve this for the future. So for now, we're just going to skip that one, right? Because we're saying we're saving that rack space, or tile space, sorry, for whatever reason. That's just, our model here. And then we can finish filling out the rest of the row, right? Say, hey, let's put in our other racks. Maybe we're going to 106 for whatever reason, and it's going to face left. So here we'll go ahead and create that. Very easy to stick them here in the map. And then, as we're looking in here and, we say, hey, you know what? I made a mistake. I wasn't supposed to reserve that tile. Whoops. Right. I'm actually supposed to, maybe reserve this tile over here. Or maybe we want to move a rack. Right? Say, hey, I put it in the wrong place. So pretty easy, right? I have something existing already. We could either delete it and just stick it back in, or if I know where I want it to go, we can move it across that XY grid, right? So let's just try, for example, let's say we moved this guy up. And we were going to put him in X position 4,4. Now that should fail if I did my logic right, and this is really helpful, right? Here, it's saying, hey, you can't do that. That's already been defined for something else. So that can be helpful for you. I know sometimes working on XY coordinates can be a little bit of a challenge. It is here to help you with those concepts, right? Like, oops, I didn't mean to modify the X. I meant to modify the Y, let's say, and I wanted to move it over, a couple of rows, right? So now we went ahead and moved that down. Here we go, as an example, right? Of course, maybe it's easier for you to just go ahead and delete that. We're going to delete the rack, and we're going to say, hey, you know what? And rather than that, I actually wanted it over here. And rather than me go figure out what those XY coordinates are, I'm just going to delete it and go ahead and stick it back in there, right? Maybe that's easier. Basically, however, whatever makes sense for you as you're doing this, whatever's easier for you as you click through. Right, so you have that availability. And up here, again, I made another simple mistake, clicked the wrong one. I meant to choose 106, I choose 105. Warns me of that fact, lets me move that rack over to where I wanted it, right? So really flexible as I'm working in this. As you use it, it starts to get really simple to do, to move things around and create things. Notion being, again, perhaps, we're having, again, this large space over here. We're saying, hey, maybe this section of the floor, it's unusable, right? So we're going to say, these sections of tiles we cannot use for whatever number of reasons. And so let's go ahead and put those as unusable, right? And we'll see those show up here, nice and easy. We've marked that section off unusable. Maybe it's a closet or what have you. You could mock out your crack units here along the sides where they typically are, like if you wanted to actually might have those labeled out here on the floor plan map as well. So we can see where all of our cooling and is it available in the data center as well. So lots of flexibility how I can use the tool here to map out what's in the real world into the data here we have in the database. All right. So those are some basics of using the tool, some simple ways that I might navigate through the tool, and some of the common challenges that I have seen, using the tool. The one caveat I would mention is here, just always remember that scrolling is going to zoom you here. And if you have scrolled in and you want to move around, remember to click and drag. And then, go ahead and scroll out. To me, this is the easiest. Move your mouse over to the left-hand side of the screen or to the right-hand side of the screen, grab hold of your browser bar, and you can move up and down. Right, just a little navigation tips here as far as limitations of working within a browser when you're dealing with these images like this, right? So some just navigational tips that we've discovered, hopefully will be helpful for you as you use the tool. We don't want you to get frustrated there, right? So a couple little tips. Remember, scroll is going to zoom you in and out. Drag if you want to move around, and move over to the right-hand side of the screen to grab hold of your scrolling up and down within the browser. So quick little tips there for navigation. Okay, Taylor, pivoting over to you to see what kind of maybe interesting questions we might want to talk about live here during Q&A as we move through the Q&A session.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've been receiving a few questions that have been pretty good. I think the first one to start off with that would be worth noting just live would be the question of, does this application have exposed APIs for any kind of like programmatic use?
Short answer is yes, absolutely. Everything available in the Nautobot database is always available via the API. And you can absolutely scroll down to the bottom of the the browser there to drill into that API reference. You can see that there is one of the ways you might find that. As well as you can always go up into your plugin and take a look at the details of what's available on those installed plugins and see the representation of all of the endpoints available right there, easy for you as well. So maybe that's easier than going and drilling into the Swagger endpoint. You can take a look and see what those endpoints are there. Just go to plugins, go to your, my browser has decided not to respond. There we go. Go to your installed plugins, drill into the plugin, and then you'll be able to find those API endpoints. Other
Awesome.
questions?
Yes, there was another question regarding, let's see, can the displayed names of the racks, the aisles, cold, hot aisles, etc., can they be larger, or what would be the best way to just visually represent those easier?
Yeah, so when we're looking at, I think the question is basically if you're looking in the full map view at a relatively large tile space, that it may become quite small to see. So in an overall view, I think the best way at the moment would be to zoom in on that space and be able to make it larger that way. Interesting question though, as far as like, can I increase that font size by default? That's something we could look at for the future, but right now the answer is to go ahead and scroll in on that floor plan map and drill into it so you can see those details. Hopefully that's helpful.
And that's something we can
kind of, go ahead, Taylor.
Yeah, and that's something that if we need to change, we could definitely submit a feature request for in the Git repository for this application as well.
Yeah, great point there as well. And then it actually just reminded me as we were working through this, I neglected to actually demo this feature here. As we look at the floor plan and we're saying, hey, I'm kind of curious to see what's installed in that rack. I can just click on that rack there on the floor plan and be taken right into the rack itself. I can see all of those details, all of the devices installed in the rack, and then of course devices in the rack. Go ahead and click on them and see those details, right? So you can start all the way from that high level bird's eye view of your data center and drill right down into the device as needed. So you have that flexibility as you move through. Also helpful for, maybe someone in DC Ops, right? They're looking at their rack. Maybe they're doing a rack audit and they look at the rack and they say, hey, this edge router here, it's not actually in U40 like it's shown here on the map. It's actually in U39. Super easy. We can drill into that. We can see it's assigned to U40. Let's go ahead and edit that. Let's move that device to where it actually is because we're doing our rack audit, and we'll be able to come in here and move that down to where we want it to be, right? So it's not in U40, it's actually in U39. Let's go ahead and update that. Really easy, right? We can fix things on the fly from our laptop, from our iPad, potentially even from the phone, right? Like you could fix this, right? So having that capability to modify those things, get them to where they should be, really helps us as we move through the data center and keeping good hygiene on the data, moving things to where they should be. I must have clicked on a different rack there. Maybe it was in 101, I think. Yeah, there we go. So here we are. Now, obviously, just dynamically moved on the.
And then one final question that I think would be useful for everyone live would be the question of, are we able to export the map and save that for external use?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have that capability right there up at the top. Save as an SVG. We can export that map out. Load it up into Confluence or, some other location where we might be storing static data. Just keeping in mind, of course, when you do this, that's now static data and immediately means it's probably going to become out of date relatively quickly. So, going into the source of truth is always the best choice. But of course, sometimes maybe you need to send this over to a third party or something, for they're doing installations in the data center, that is an option. Personally, I do, formerly was a network engineer, have a lot of experience with this, where you give that static map out to the third party, they go out there, they start doing work, and then midstream, you start making changes because that's what always happens in the real world. It's better to give the third party restricted access to Nautobot. They can see that data, they can see those changes live on the fly. So if you have that capability with your third party, you could create a special group for them. All they can do is read floor plans, for example. You have that flexibility within Nautobot to do that. Then you don't need to worry about giving them static drawings that are going to get out of date. Right? They have direct access to the live data. You give them read-only access so they can't change things, perhaps, if desired. Or maybe you let them just do things on floor plan, right? Like maybe you let them move racks around in the floor plan because they're out there in the real world. So a lot of flexibility there to really improve your communication with your third parties or your data center teams, rather than having to work back and forth between static drawings. We have a question from Martin here. We have a few racks which are larger than other racks, usually network data racks. We want to see which racks are larger, but this is not. When you say larger, you mean spanning multiple tiles, I assume. In which case we could do that, unless you mean that they're taking up just slightly more space. I'm not really sure the direction of the question there. Martin, maybe if you could clarify that. And then from Mark, we have a question about working in tandem with DSIM as a replacement for DSIM. Great question. So you have options there. If desired, that you want to work in tandem with your existing DSIM tool, we absolutely could do that. We could take the example of using our single source of truth application to synchronize data from Nautobot into or out of that DSIM tool, so long as that DSIM tool has an API, right? We could do that synchronization back and forth. However, if you're looking to simplify your life and you have the capability within the organization, like, hey, the DC ops team agrees, and the network team agrees, and anyone else maybe that's involved in the decision, maybe you centralize onto Nautobot, right? Like we have all of the capabilities to model the real world here into Nautobot now. So maybe you don't need the DSIM tool anymore. It's absolutely possible, but you have those options. If desired, you could totally keep it, or maybe you centralize into Nautobot and you can sunset that DSIM tool. So yeah, I understand, Martin, the question there, where it is one tile, but some taking just slightly more than one tile. At the moment, not the floor plan app is going to work in full tiles, right? So that's either one tile or two tiles, what have you. A great point though, and something we can absolutely look at as a feature request to be able to say do partial tile expansions. So I don't want to just go to two tiles. I want to go to 1.2 tiles or 1.5 tiles. Although ideally, no, of course, this is coming from a very academic stance. But me, as formerly as a network engineer, I always hated that. I really want all my racks to be the same, but I know sometimes that's just inevitable in the real world. Sometimes that does happen. But that always drove me crazy, especially when you go to the data center and you look down the aisle, you have nice clean racks, and then all of a sudden, bam, this one's sticking out a quarter of a tile. The noise, it just annoys you like more than anything else. But I do understand sometimes it just happens in the real world. Great point though, and we will absolutely look into putting in a feature request for that. We could see that being a future feature in Nautobot. For now, you would just have to map those as a single tile because we can't do partial tiles. Let's see, any other questions we have coming in? I think that is all the questions it looks like we have coming in live. Thanks everyone for attendance. This was a really great chat, going through all of these details with you. Hopefully you're super excited about this app. This is the 1.0 release, so of course there may be some things that are missing. We're always looking for your feedback, so thanks for Martin and Mark and all the other folks that were asking us questions. We're always looking to make it better. Please do interact with us, whether it's via the public Slack channel, reaching out to the sales team if you'd like to see about possible engagements with us, as well as attending future webinars and seeing us at conferences. We're always traveling out to the various conferences. Please come and stop and say hi to us at the booth. Ask us questions. We're always here for you. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day, great evening, wherever you are in the world.